Hello everyone, and welcome to the Trending in My Life podcast. And this week is very, very special. Drum roll please. Because it's the 100th episode of the Trending in My Life podcast. Yay! Celebrate! And I immediately thought, what in the heck did I think to talk about for 100 episodes? But somehow I did. And things were very, very different when I started this podcast. Because it was at the start of my YouTube journey, I wasn't that confident talking to camera. And even when I did my podcasts, I felt I couldn't talk for like 10 to 20 minutes, even 30 minutes. And keep it fluent and keep on topic and stuff like that. So I used to write them out by hand, and I used to know that if I reached 15 pages, that was going to be a whole episode. And sometimes if the topic was flowing, I'd write 20 pages, but those written pages were what I would read when I recorded my podcasts. And these days I have a topic in mind and I might put a couple of bullet points on a piece of paper, but mostly I just chat. Yeah, so how different things have gone. And I thought, thinking about what in the heck did I talk about for 100 podcasts? I started to think of the categories of topic, and I definitely did a lot of podcasts about positively thinking about certain aspects of your life. And I got out my folders where every week I keep a sheet which will say the podcast name and the description that I put on YouTube and the tags, so that I know what I've done in sequence, and then I can think, oh well, I talked about something very similar last week, so I want a variant of it this week, that kind of thing. But anyway, I got them out and I thought immediately there was this big heavy folder with, each episode with 15 to 20 handwritten pages. And I'm sort of flicking through to look at the titles and stuff. And I thought, gosh, how different it used to be, And I used to put out the podcast every week on a Monday around, I think, 8 o'clock, something like that. 8:30. But the idea was there would be lots of commuters on Monday morning travelling to work that would be looking for something to listen to in their earpods, so that they could pass the journey more quickly. So I thought that would be the biggest audience. But over time, this has switched to different days and times, and I settled on Sunday mornings at 8:30 about 2 months ago, I think. And that was because I'd looked at you Google when is a good time to put out a podcast to have a good audience, and what it said was on a Sunday morning you've got people waking up later, lazing in bed, listening to podcasts, even listening to them over breakfast, stuff like that. So there is a sort of a niche window there to use, and it did increase the numbers in my podcast, not hugely, but much better than they were. So yeah, that's where I've settled on at the moment. But who's to say that won't change in the future? I hope not. I kind of like it on Sunday mornings. Because of doing it Monday mornings, my Sunday evening was always a bit frantic, making sure the podcast was ready and uploaded and stuff like that. And I don't have that now, because that's what my Saturday evenings are like. And I got much more sort of go with the flow. I will think of an idea to talk about quite often on a Saturday afternoon, and then start recording in the evening and editing and uploading. I didn't used to do that. I would plan way ahead in the week to have it, because I had to write it all. It was a lot less spontaneous and not so flowy in the way I talk. I mean, I know that I have some episodes when I go, yeah. Or I had one which I kept saying something like, oh, yeah, and It drove me mad editing it. But what I found was initially when I used to edit them, I would edit every single out. And now I don't do that. Yes, if it's driving me nuts, then I will edit a certain proportion out. But it's like, that one happened spontaneously. It's part of how I talk. It's part of me concentrating on what comes next, what I'm going to talk about next, because it's not scripted. So I keep it in because it's part of me. And sometimes there are huge gaps, which obviously I edit out, where I'll be staring out the window and thinking, oh, look at that robin there. But so that has to be edited out. But I'm hugely proud of doing 100 podcasts. And I would like to look back at some of the topics that I covered and what motivated me to do them. I mean, we had a number of podcasts related to the move that was sort of forced on me last year. And that was because it came out of the blue, and I could either have just stopped doing my channel or incorporated what was happening in my life into my channel, which is what I did. And I knew that it would only appeal to a certain audience, but that was the risk I was prepared to take. And I thought, well, it's either no views because you've not done any content, or it's some views. And even though I was doing a lot of other things, like trying to find somewhere to live and stuff like that, I did find it was kind of therapeutic and kind of helped, because I could talk to you about it and felt that in a way was venting what I was feeling. And yeah, I mean, YouTubers are in the same boat, the content creators. We're talking to a camera. We can't see your reaction. We only get that when you put it in the comments. So yeah, you just go with your gut and do what you think is right, which is what I did. The other thing that was a big part of my podcasts in the beginning was Buddy, who is a ceramic bulldog. Is he ceramic? No, he's made of resin. He's like a garden ornament, but I've always kept him in the house, and I've got two of them. One of them's called Buddy and one of them's called Barry. But Buddy used to be sat on a cushion and with a backdrop, and he was the face of my podcasts. He was on every single thumbnail. And my thinking in that respect was, if you saw on a page that came up on your YouTube Buddy's face, you would know that that related to my channel, because it was used consistently as the face of the podcasts. But then, of course, things evolve, and you get to know that thumbnail is part of why people click on your channel. And I started to do more elaborate thumbnails, and they were getting more views, so I dropped Buddy. Buddy is still sat in my bedroom, so don't worry, he didn't go anywhere. But yeah, and then I moved on, and I sometimes use my face on a podcast. It depends what the podcast is about, usually. But yeah, I got much more creative with the thumbnails. And whether that has affected the views or not, it might not be. It might be the topics. It might just be the topics that have attracted more people, or the change in the time that I spoke about. But yeah, Buddy used to be always the thumbnail. I think there was one thumbnail, but I think it was for a video. Not sure, it might have been a podcast, where I put the two of them in the shot, because they're not normally even in the same room at home. One's upstairs, one's downstairs. But yeah, there is two of them and they're identical. Yeah, so that was a difference from the start of my podcast to now. I think I also got more comfortable with the fact that I can ramble slightly off topic and it doesn't matter. Because what matters is that there's a flow, that I'm chatting to you, that you're listening, and that I'm keeping your interest by where things are going. And, you know, I may go off on a tangent, but it's quite an interesting tangent. That's how I think about it. Also, if it wasn't for my son, I wouldn't have done podcasts when I started a YouTube channel. He had a journey to work where he would listen to podcasts. So to him, it was a natural thing to include in a channel's content. I always read my Kindle on the way to work and don't dip into podcasts very often. So I didn't have any experience of that, or the enjoyment it can give people, or the learning, or anything else that you get from podcasts. And then when I started to look at them, a lot of them were people interviewing people, which of course that wasn't going to happen. I was just starting a channel and, who's going to want to be interviewed by me? So I took from the fact that when I started the channel, I wanted it to help people and be positive and help their mindset in dealing with the ups and downs of life in a positive way, and giving them some thoughts on that, how I've dealt with things in my life, that sometimes if you put a positive spin on things, it doesn't seem so bad. So that's where I started with my podcasts, and then of course there's the seasonal stuff. You've got to address Christmas and any other big time of year, even like summer holiday vacation time. All these things are part of people's lives, and if I include them, then they're part of my life and you can relate to that as well. I also respond to comments and people giving me input on different topics I've covered. So sometimes somebody might comment and I'll think they clearly need more on this topic to be discussed. So I will schedule to do another podcast in a similar vein, but sort of exploring another area of the topic. When I very first started my channel, I was getting comments from students new in London. They were dealing with being in a university for the first time, getting used to classes and trying to make friends, and also London itself and what that was like and what they'd imagined it was like, but then it had turned into something a bit different. And I felt that if I could support them in any way with my podcast, then I would do that. And I do think in some small way, at least I hope, fingers crossed, I did help a few people along the way. I do try and be mindful that if people have taken the time to comment, then, it's nice to respond in whatever way you are able to within the parameters of the channel. And I have come a long way since then because I do a lot more content. So, because I put out probably 9 pieces of content a week now, to fit in extra pieces of content because of a comment is not so easy. And I'm not saying I wouldn't do it, but I'm saying it would have to be scheduled for a few weeks ahead kind of thing and not done immediately. And I'd have to feel that I could give what that person wanted in some way as well. I've been criticised for the fact that my channel doesn't have a niche, and I recognise that in that, I don't do topic after topic after topic, exactly the same topic kind of thing. It is about my life. My channel is about my life, and it's about London and sometimes going day trips out of London, which I think is part of London life as well, because inevitably if you live here you will do that. I think a lot of my life in London is also based on my life previously and my life experiences, in that I've not had a lot of money and I've had to make do and mend, and I've had to make use of free places to go because I didn't have any money. So I will often do things on a budget and be conscious of the fact that there are a lot of people in London that don't have a lot of money and for whom it's a struggle to meet the bills and stuff like that. And I know how that feels, and you don't know when something is going to happen and throw random stuff in the mix. Like I spoke about earlier, when I suddenly had to move home because the landlord was selling the house. So, yeah, and then you have to cope with that and you have to deal with that. If my podcast in some way helps someone who ends up in a similar situation, then I'm happy to help. As many of you know, I work full-time. I used to say it more often in the beginning, and then I decided people will get sick of you banging on about that. So I sort of avoided putting it in podcasts when I taught. But it means I can relate to people who work full-time. and I did a bunch of podcasts around working in London, the opportunities, what it's like to move to London and the stress that brings. We have a tube strike next week, and I've done a podcast about tube strikes before, which is particular for people who work in London, of course, and are trying to travel to work, and the frustrations that brings up. I also did sort of podcasts about that post-vacation feeling, the blues that you get when you come back from holiday and you have to settle back into the routine of your job again. I think probably the most popular of the podcasts about work I did was one which was You're More Than Your Job, because so often our careers define who we are. If you're meeting them for the first time, you inevitably ask them what they do for a living, what their job is. And in that way, we've sort of set ourselves up for defining who we are by our job, but we're so much more, we're parents, we're children, we're grandparents, but also we have hobbies and interests and hiking and fishing, and there's so many other parts to our lives that we shouldn't think about ourselves as just the job. And I think that was one of my more popular career-based podcasts that I've done. I mean, obviously because I live in London, we're all about what the weather's like and and the commute. These are our two major topics of conversation. And it is different when you live outside of London because, I've worked and lived outside of London, a long way from London. And it is very different. I think I'm conscious of the fact now, I was thinking about it just this morning, that when I lived in those places outside of London, and I've lived north, south, east and west of London, the fact that I don't drive used to be a big problem when I didn't live in London. And this is the only place I've ever lived where my not driving didn't matter, because I can still get to everywhere I want to get to, which is a big deal for me. It gives me the freedom to travel to events, to travel to places, to not be tied to one town. So if my career type podcasts tend to be based around London, it's because that's where I am at the moment, and that's my mindset, because of I travel to work each day. And it was funny, on Friday the train that I normally catch was cancelled, the one was before was cancelled, the one was after was cancelled, so I had to just go a different way completely. And so I was walking to another station, and the day before that, it had hailed exactly when I went to leave and then continued with torrential rain. And the day before that, it had hailed exactly when I went to leave. and I thought, so when I walked out of work on Friday and it wasn't hailing, I was like, yes! I got to the station and trains are cancelled. And I thought, this is London life. You have to go with the flow. You really do. And like I said, next week we've got tube strikes, so I'll still be getting to work, but just a completely different way. So that's formed part of my podcast. And sometimes I've done like a diary of my week or London life and what that's like, because I do think, having lived not in London and then in London, it is a different way of life. It is completely different. Yes, you still go to the supermarket, you still do your laundry, but there's whole aspects to it that people outside of London aren't so conscious of. They don't think about travelling to work. They just get in their car and drive there, or they just get the bus, and it's like one bus, one journey. It's not several trains, and you don't rely on them running and not being cancelled or going on strike or anything, because it's just different, which I think is true of any major city that you live in. Generally, the topics have been dominated by positivity, how we deal with stress. There was a whole section in January of one year about beating the blues. And I talked about this in podcasts because there's all this celebration at Christmas and then nothingness in January, February, and the weather's horrible. And it was how people could deal with that and keep going. I try and also deal with some obstacles that can come up in your life, some things that might happen that you need to deal with, and ways of getting around that. You know, when you feel you need a little boost, how you get balance in your life, how you overcome feelings of not being good enough and dealing with juggling family and careers, even trying too hard or not having the courage to take those opportunities when they arrive. I've done happy resets and sunrise vibes, things that would keep you positive and keep you going. I'm all about trying to find the good things in life, the little things, just everyday things that might make you smile. It means a lot. You trick your body into thinking you're happy, even though it's just for a second. But these things help in everyday life to keep you going and keep you motivated. The end goal for all of us is to be happy and enjoy life, and I hope you achieve that too. So yes, I went from not even thinking about doing podcasts to doing one a week, and as it's progressed, I've understood why my son wanted me to do it. Because I get to talk to you about things, and there are topics that crop up in life that I wouldn't have thought would crop up, things that happen in my life, and I think I really need to talk about that because somebody else might be going through that as well. And over the 2 years now that I've been doing this, I have enjoyed doing the podcast and chatting to you about things, and I hope I've become somewhat better at it. I don't have to script it anymore. I just tell you what I think, and you don't have to agree or disagree, but I'm just sharing. I want to say a big, giant thank you to all the friends and family and viewers of my channel, the people that have helped me along the way to continue on my journey on YouTube, the supporters that have encouraged me, and for the people who've just been kind. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like, comment, subscribe, share with a friend, and come back next time. And here's to the next 100 episodes.